Hello, welcome to this next Substance Designer tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to have a look at height maps. Now don't worry about this graph, this is just me setting up a demo. I'm just going to demonstrate how height works to start with. So height is basically a black and white map, and depending upon the value in each pixel will depend upon how much it displaces and in which direction it displaces. So at the standard, black displaces down, mid-grey stays exactly where it should, and white displaces upwards. So I could demonstrate that with this little stripe thing I've got set up here. If I increase my height scale and I'm on the high-res plane here, you'll see that I get steps, and if I zoom it up and down you'll see that the grey stays exactly where it is, and the white goes up and the black goes down. So that's the general directions, and I see a lot of times models are used or displacement maps are used and they seem very black and very white, and they provide some slightly unpredictable, in my mind, results because, you know, generally speaking, if I'm displacing a ground plane, I don't want to displace it too far down. But if I've got a lot of black in a map, it's not gonna, you know, it won't work that way. The other issue here is, depending upon your target output, where you're going to use this, what render engine, will depend upon how this behaves or how it should behave. So if, for example, I take the height level down here to black, which is 0, and then if I do my scale, you'll see the black doesn't move and everything else moves up. And similarly, if I move it all the way to white, the displacement all goes down. And generally speaking, your render engine will have a default that, you know, or a way of setting it such that, you know, whichever level, whichever colour you want to be will stay stationary and everything else will move. Generally speaking, I've found that most of them, whoops, that's the wrong slider, do use the mid-level as stationary. So you might need some experimentation, or you might find that, you know, if in your target application it's behaving strangely, you might need to adjust the grey level somewhere, or the, you know, the height level. Okay, so another issue why this causes me some grief sometimes is that if I change this over to, say, the rounded cube and use my just 3 stripes map, this is the sort of craziness I get. You see, it's sort of pulling the mesh apart in some places. I hope you can see it's all a bit black and white, unfortunately, but there's a great big gap here, and there's great big gaps in there. It's all a bit mad. However, if I put a border around of it of the mid-grey, which is our non-moving colour, and pop that in, you'll see it becomes much more predictable. So the grey isn't moving, it's staying just exactly where it is, and the white is going out and the black is going in, and that makes sense. And that's because, just because I've put a border around it, so that at the seams where the UVs are all meeting, if I pull out here, it's a very straightforward UV, this one, you know, it's doing exactly the same thing. You know, not exactly the same thing, it's just not displacing. So I'm not getting any split seams, I'm not getting any kind of movement at the edges, which would have to be repeated, you know, on the opposite island, if that makes sense. Okay, so with that said, I'm sorry for the long boring introduction. What we're going to do with this is create a ground. We're going to put some depth into it, and we're going to put some height onto it to, you know, simulate a kind of muddy, stony ground. So I will talk to you then. Okay, so let's create a new package. So it's a substance graph. I'm using metallic roughness, we'll call it ground, relative to parent 4096 4096, and click OK. Now it just so happens that this default colour that plugs into our base colour is a perfect mid-grey. It is dead centre, so I'm going to use that. I'm just going to pull it away a little bit, but what I do need to do is convert it from our colour node, which is denoted by this little orange circle, into a grayscale node. So if I click on it and then click grayscale, it will switch from being colour to grayscale. Okay, so this is going to be our height map, and will provide some information for colour at some point in time, but it's too flat, of course, so we want to give it some undulations, and for that I'm going to add a purlin noise. So if I press space and type in purlin and pick the purlin noise, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. See, it's a bit grainy at the moment, it's a little bit too detailed, so I'm going to take the scale down until I get sort of broad changes. I don't want much of a change, I just want them to be, you know, within a certain tolerance. Okay, so because I don't want to displace to the maximum for the black, I only want to displace a very small amount, I need to adjust this a little bit. So we can do that with a levels node. So if I press space and levels and then plug that into that, what I want to do is take out the very dark blacks, and I do that by just sliding across this black slider on the bottom until I'm about where I want to be. I might come back and adjust that in a moment, but we shall see. So now I need to blend these nodes together, and if I select this noodle and press space and type in blend, that will plug me a new blend in. I'll just bring it back, and then I'll plug this levels into the other node, and what I want for this one is min darken. So that's going to take out the maximum kind of white values and just give me the dark values, which is perfect because that's what I want. I want it to displace, and I want it to displace downwards. Okay, so that's okay, it's alright. It's not very exciting, so I'm going to adjust my noise here. Maybe take the scale up or down just to, you know, get to a point. I don't want it to be, you know, completely displaced, and I don't want it to be too plain. Perhaps somewhere around there. You can, of course, you know, adjust for your preferences. Excuse me. Okay, so this isn't actually displacing at the moment because this is plugged into the colour node. So let's take that and plug it into the displacement node, the height node rather, and then on the material go to default and edit, and then I'm going to increase my height scale, and you can just see that at the edges of that, you know, where the where it's intersecting with the edge is just going down. If I go underneath a bit, you should see a few little undulations there. Nothing very exciting. Okay. Now, because I'm only going down and there's quite a transition between these two, you'll see it sort of drops off quite quickly. We might want to pop a blur in here. So I'm going to put a blur off to one side, and let's use the high quality one. Don't have to use the high quality one, it does provide a bit of an overhead to the calculations, so just use an ordinary blur if that's what you want. So I'm going to turn my quality up, and now I've got a much softer transition there. Now I don't have to replug these in. If I press shift and click on this node, and move it around a bit, you'll see it detaches, and if I plug it into this output, it will reconnect itself and follow on. And now I have a much kind of softer, displace, just making it look a bit more pleasant, really. Okay, so this is not really doing it for me at the moment, so I'm going to do a little addition to this. So I'm going to move these off to one side, and I'm going to repeat my Perlin noise. So I'm going to select both of these and press Shift, Control and D, and that will create me a new copy. And now I can adjust my scale. I'm going to bring it down a bit, and then we'll have a new blend on this noodle. So space and blend, and then we'll plug that into the top and change this to min darken. And now we've got a few more details in there. So we've got some big details, we've got some smaller details, and it's starting to look a bit like a ground. Not a lot like a ground, but a bit like a ground, which is good enough for me. So let's go through this blur. Yeah, that's good. So I was just checking that this wasn't my map because it's too sharp. And I can also bring the levels down on this one so that they're not quite as deep as the bigger holes. Don't go too far because well, don't go beyond the midpoint essentially, because if you go beyond the midpoint it won't do anything, because we're using min rather than max. Trying to see if I can actually see them. Must be there somewhere. There we go. Okay, so that's the general shape of our ground, and next we're going to put some details on top of it. So we're going to use the mid-grain above to get some small details on the surface of our ground. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so now we're going to displace change the height in the other direction, and we're going to use a very similar setup, but we're going to use a different blend. So let's pick a different pattern, and I think clouds. Now I haven't shown you much yet of this, but in the library under generators you get your noises, and you can have a look here and it gives you a better idea of what you're getting essentially. So we've got a moisture noise. No, I want something up the top. We want clouds. Where's clouds? Okay, I'm going to use the clouds 2. I'm going to drag that in, and just like before, we need to adjust our white map. We're looking for white now to push our mesh outwards, or upwards rather. But we don't want it too white. We want it to be just above mid-grey. So if I click there, drag out, and type levels, it will have me a levels node, and then I want to take my white node, my white output here, and drag it to just above middle. There we go, and now we've got a much noisier noise. I quite like that, and we'll drag that up there, and then add in a blend, plug our blur and our new noise in there. And this time, because we want it to be white, we're going to change this to a max lighten. Now you'll see that's quite subtle. In fact, it's so subtle you can barely see it, and that's because I maybe have overdone my levels there. So let's go in and have a look. There we go. Now we've got some light coming out, and if I shift and click on this output and plug it into this output, again it's plugged itself in. So now we have some larger areas. We've got some areas where we can start to see a little bit of displacement upwards, and it's adding on top of our downward displacement, so it's kind of consistent. They're crossing over each other and building as you would kind of want them to. You can have it such that it doesn't fill the holes, but I want it to. So okay, so part of the problem with this is it's all a bit how can I put it, it's all a bit kind of linear. Everything looks kind of added on and there's not much noise going on. So what we're going to use next is a curves node to try and get a little bit more of detail from that clouds node to give us more of an effect. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so levels is all very well, but I don't find it particularly, how can I put it, subtle. There is a more subtle way to get a bit of detail out of this without blowing our black and white values, and that's with a curve node. So I'll select that noodle, press space and type in curve, and I'll get my curve node, and I'm going to plug this into my blend instead and get rid of this levels node. And as you can see, I've got a lot of something going on. Let me take the roughness right the way up on this, because I'm getting a bit annoyed with the speck I'm getting off it. So this is massively over the top, unless you want it to look like that. But with the curves, bearing in mind that I only want to move in a positive direction, I can do that by setting a minimum value. So if I double click in the middle here, and I'm just going to raise that up a bit, now it's exposed my points, I can move my black point here up to 0.5, 50%, half. Yeah. So now, I don't know if you noticed, well, probably not. If I get to a side view, if I drag that down, you see it's displacing downwards, and I don't want it to. I want control. So if I drag it up to 0.5, it's going to, whoops, I've gone the wrong way. Oh, come on, John. It's not going to displace at all. So I'm only displacing in a positive way. But I don't want huge details, so what I'm going to do is actually drag my white down to level with my grey, and now I've got no details, which is ridiculous. But if I drag my white down to 0.5 as well, come on, one more little nick, there we go. See, now I get kind of an all over pattern, and basically it's just taking everything between black and white and giving it a value, and we can control it by simply adding more points. So say I wanted somewhere about here, about 1/10 of the way along, I don't want to include those values. All I have to do is set them down to 0.5 and it will take them out of the graph. Similarly at this end, if I drag this down to 0.5, it will take them out of the pattern. You can see now I've got less noise all over, and if you're unhappy with a point, you can just delete it and you'll get all that detail back again. But as it stands, I'm displacing or moving my height a little bit further than I wanted. So what I'm going to do is bring that down to maybe 0.59 to get a more subtle movement across my ground plane here. Okay, so we've added some negative, we've added some positive, we've got a basic thing, and now we'll start to put a few little details into it to give it some character. So we're going to add some stones, we perhaps add some sticks if we've got time at the end, and yeah, we'll see where we go from there. So I'll talk to you in the next section. Okay, so now we're going to start to put some small stones around the place. We're going to put a couple of levels of stones. We're going to start small and then go big. So for that I'm going to start with a cells 4. In fact, let's start big and go small. That makes more sense to my brain. So this on its own doesn't look very useful, but we can use a couple of nodes to define some shapes out of it. And the first one is edge detect, and edge detect will do its absolute best to find the edges around these shapes according to a couple of parameters. So we've got edge width, which we can reduce, and edge roundness we can reduce, and eventually we get back to this sort of shape. So I'm going to increase the width and the roundness because I don't want them to be particularly, how can I put it, square. And then I'm going to increase the width until I get many fewer than I started with, and we can take roundness up to do that as well, and maybe edge width down, just balancing the two to get a nice pattern going. So that essentially is going to be the arrangement of my stones, but I don't want them to be just flat like that, and I'll demonstrate for why. So if I plug these in and get a blend up, so space and blend, I'll take our ground as we have it and our stones as we have them, and again we want a max lighten. So now I've got some very stark stones, and if I plug that into if I shift and grab this output and pop it into this input, you'll see what happens. I get some very displaced stones. So first of all, they're very sharp, so there's no real subtlety to them, and secondly, they're too tall. So let's use a couple of things here. So first I'll put a blur in, so I'll select that noodle and type in blur, and again I'm going to use the high quality one because my PC will take it. If not, if yours slows down too much, then use the normal blur, and I'm going to take my values down, and that kind of by nature is going to reduce the amounts of whites, and I'm just going to take it down until it gets close. So they're still too pointy, so perhaps now we need a levels or a curves to bring that down. I'm going to use curves, and then if I take the white value at this end, sometimes, well no, not sometimes, you do need to put a thing in to activate these handles. I'm going to take that down to perhaps 0.7, and then I'm going to delete this one out, and now they're much more subtle. You'll see they're more kind of spots on the skin rather than completely jagged pieces. If you want jagged pieces, it's fine. Just be aware that you can do something about it. So I'm going to take my blur down a little bit and then balance it with the curves to get to a happy medium. So I want them to look like stones, but I don't want them to look completely displaced out. Can I add another point and bring that up a little bit, and that will give them a little bit of extra width and shape. As you can see, I've got kind of a solid centre with kind of a nice fall off around the outside. So now we have some stones. Isn't that lovely? So what we'll do in the next one is we'll do exactly the same again, but we're going to make many fewer smaller stones. So I'll talk to you then. So next then, we'll repeat this chain, but adjust the parameters. So I'm just going to select everything here. So I've got shift held down. That's not working. Perhaps it's control. There we go, control held down, and I'll press control and D. I'm just going to move that up off to one side, if I can get my fingers in order. There we go. Okay, so instead of this one plugging into there, it's going to be this one. So I'll plug that in there, and now we'll adjust. So currently it's just going to overlay as it was, but if I reduce my scale here, sorry, increase my scale to get many more finer pieces, and then adjust my edge width downwards and my edge roundness downwards, I can then start to work with that to get many more but fewer stones. And let's click through to see how it calculates, and there we go. And now I will transfer these inputs by pressing shift, oh goodness, pressing shift, then dragging that output to that output, and there we have it. We have more little stones. Okay, I might adjust the amount of stones I've got here, because I think I could do more. Let me have a look at this. Might be a question of needing to decrease these actually for the smaller ones, because I don't want them to be the same kind of height. But I'm going to mess around a little bit with the curves there, and here I'm going to take the edge width down, and I'm going to increase the scale a little bit to get more but smaller, if that makes sense. There we go. So now we have some stones sort of get scattered around the place. We could add some additional sort of warping and all sorts to that, but for the moment I'm just going through the basic kind of process. Don't want to overcomplicate it with more things. Okay, so next we're going to put some sticks in. So we'll do that next. Talk to you. Okay, so I want to make some sticks now, and I'm going to start with a shape first. So space and shape, and we'll use a square, and I'm just going to squeeze it so that it's sort of long and sticky shaped, and then I'm going to squeeze it down a bit. There we go, so it's not touching the edges. Now straight sticks aren't very fun, so let's put a warp on it. Pop that in there, and nothing will happen because we need an input. So I don't want to warp this too much, so let's bring a purlin in, a nice generalized noise, and plug that in, see what happens. It will go nuts. And what I want to do is first of all take the scale down, and then on the warp itself we can adjust the intensity. So you can see now I've got a slightly kind of wavy, wobbly stick. And because, if I just use this stick everywhere, it's not going to be that interesting. So what I'm going to do is create another warp, plug the initial into it, and then plug my purlin into it, and give it a different intensity. We can also translate that, but what I'm going to do now is plug this into a tile generator. So first of all I want to switch it to pattern and set the pattern number to 2. I'm going to pop both of these in there, and now it's really dull, so we need to give it some randomness. So for the pattern distribution we do want random, and we can pop a random rotation on it, but that rotates the tile. We want to rotate the image, so let's do that a little bit further down. Size, we can put some randomized scale into it. Well, that's not randomized, that's normal, sorry. It's the one below. So that should scale them randomly across. Position, we can do a random offset there to give us some you know, to give us some variation. Come on, John. And where are we? Rotation. Now we can rotate. So this will rotate the actual image within the tile, as opposed to just the tile, because the tile can only rotate 90 degrees, but the image within can rotate more subtly. And now we can put a random mask on. So if I random mask this to a certain level, I'll get a relatively random pattern, and yeah, so that's fine. So let's add that into our current map. So let's press space and type blend. Whoops, perhaps if you select it, John. There we go. Let's plug that in there, and this one in there, and then select the to max lighten, and then we'll use shift and drag our output into the new one. And as you can see, we have some crazy sticks. If the jaggedness is bugging you, if you go to materials, default and edit, just increase the tessellation and it will gradually get better. So once again, we've got this displacing far too high, so what I'll do is click this noodle, press space, put in curves, and then we're going to take the high values, let's pop a point in there with a double click and move those down to about there, I think. So at that point I can delete. There we go. Now I can just about see those sticks in there, and that's fine. I don't want to see them a lot. I just want to. I want them to be there and a part of the pattern, but not particularly, you know, overpowering or underpowering, if that makes any sort of sense. So now we have a lovely, lovely, lovely displacement map, or height map in this case. And what we want to do is pop some colour on it. So I'm going to record a second set of videos for that, which you know, hopefully will give you a chance to absorb this and get comfortable with you know, this technique. So I will talk to you then.